Hello and welcome to this lecture. Today we are going to discuss the cause for concern about the opioids, and this is very important topic regarding the concern regarding the use of the opioids. So let's discuss one by one. So the first thing is that it is having the dependence potential, and the tolerance will develop most of people with the use of opioids. What is meant by tolerance? It means that, for example, if a person take small dose of the opioids, for example, for intense pleasure, for happiness, like you see on the right side, I show one picture of a girl that are expressing the emotions and happiness. So if a patient supposed take zero point 0.1 milligram of any opium and to feel pleasure, especially for example, and then what happened that after getting it, next time he or she needs more drug, 0.2, because his body will develop the tolerance against that amount. And actually these are all the process working on the brain in the form of neurotransmitters. We discussed before that the two main important neurotransmitters are important in the body. One is dopamine, the second one is serotonin. And for reward, dopamine is important. Serotonin is also important for expressing the emotion and feeling. So what these drugs are doing, that if a patient take 0.1 milligram of drug, he or she get pleasure, and then his brain need more drug to create the same pleasure that he or she get at that time. So that is known as tolerance. So that is why then a patient take 0.2, then his brain or her brain get more pleasure, as much pleasure as he or she get at that time, maybe first time, then 0.3, then 0.4, then 0.5, then 0.6 milligram, so on. This is not ending, there is no ending unless a patient die. So that is known as tolerance, that patient are seeking the pleasure, and that seeking pleasure patient need same level, same intense pleasure that he or she get at that time, and that the cause of that tolerance develop, patient then take more and more quantity of the drug, and that leads to obviously the dangerous effect of drugs at high concentration. And we need to know that another thing, that the dose or quantity of heroin, we don't know that how much a person is taking that quantity. Sometimes patient accidentally take more quantity, a person that is addicted, then what will next? He may or she may feel intense pleasure more than anything that before, and then he need more amount. So that is very important, that it is not regulated drug, because we know that it is a banned drug and have not been used in any medicinal purposes much. So that is very important. Then it is same true for euphoria by recreational users. Yes, this is the problem also with that drug, that it create intense euphoria, and for that let me show you some of the research that I found online with the evidence. Okay, if you take a look of this title of the article, the intersection of the woman pleasures and injection drug use. And if you take a look of this article, they are talking about the correlation between the pleasures and injecting a drug use. And when I read this article, you can read this paper in detail, they have a lot of information, but I'm going some important point, that is the relationship between this pleasure and then the drug injection. They are talking the results when they are talking about that the experience of injectors and then that pleasure, then substituting with that pleasure with the injection use, and then the use of the intimacy and or eroticism, that is very important. And then they found in contrast that the drug that a person is taking, that drugs that having a strong pleasurable experience with that drug. So this research is proving that the drug injection with the pleasure is, especially that is correlated with that, is quite have a direct relationship. And that is why the women that are experiencing, they need to experience both, especially about intimacy and eroticism, they want to take them for that, to getting that ultimate experience. So that is quite dangerous, and that having co-relationship. And there is a correlationship between the drug injection and then that intense pleasure that a person needed for intimacy. So the problem again, I again tell you that everything in excessive amount is dangerous. So if for example, somebody not take drugs, somebody take another thing or another behavior that he or she get pleasure. For example, sometimes some people seek pleasure to paint someone. So then what is that? This is also for pleasure, for seeking for enjoyment, a small enjoyment for that person. But if that become too much, 1 time, 2 time, 3 time, 4 time, 6 time, 7 time, it become more which, because sometimes some behavior have properties to become the habit, and if it become the habit, then it will be the part of your life. So what will happen if some behavior, not only about a drug, I'm not talking about a drug, but this is a behavior as well, because this article is talking about the behavior plus the drug use in combination. So the behavior plus drug use in combination, although person get intimacy or get erotism, but what next? Because we are playing with our brain are working in terms of the chemicals that is producing in the body, and that chemicals that is producing in the body, naturally, if you get high pleasure, obviously the dopamine and serotonin, the neurotransmitter, will get high. But then if a person get that, then next time he or she need again the same pleasure. So then he or she try again, then second time, then third time, then fourth time. So there is no ending, because if the drug is involved in that behavior, then what next? The drug quantity, next time person feel that he need more or she need more. So that there is no ending regarding this concept, that if we talk about where we can stop this matter, we cannot stop this matter, not only in context of the drug, but not only in terms of the behavior. We cannot control the behavior, we cannot control the drugs. If person feel pleasure, he or she need more, and it become habit. With the habit, if it become habit, later on it can become on dependency. If it become on dependency, then it could lead to later on addiction. So the physical and psychological, both when they combine, then it leads to the addiction as well. So we have to be careful. That my opinion, on that perspective is that we need to seek the healthy lifestyle, because everything is in the extreme is not good for the health. They must be moderate in their life, and life must be with the balanced life, which is important. So if somebody seeking that extreme behaviors, that extreme behavior is also one of the psychological disorders, because in my next article that I will share you with again, consecutively use of such things that leads to the disorder known as obsessive compulsive disorder, because not only in terms of the drugs sometimes, but in terms of the behavior as well, that person seeking that behavior or doing that behavior again and again, and it become obsessive compulsive disorder. Like a simple example, not in terms of the behavior, but to understand the obsessive compulsive disorder, the simple example is switch on and switch off the light. Sometimes some people switch on the light, switch off the light, fear of switch off and switch on and switch off all the times. So the meaning of obsessive compulsive behavior is that doing one thing all the time at the same time. Like for example, when you throw the ball to your pet, to your dog, he bring back the ball back to you, he feel good, so you throw back, then he bring back. So this is the example of obsessive compulsive disorder. We will discuss in our next lecture actually, but this is actually a relationship with this topic to getting the intense pleasure, and they talking about some of the experience that they have with this drug. You can read by the knowledge, but I will never recommend them, because extreme behaviors also have an impact on your brain. You may feel good at one time, but you may have the adverse effect maybe later on in your rest of your life. It may affect your living relationships as well, and that is why that is important, and I never recommend them these kind of things. But for the knowledge, there is a relationship between both of the factors, injection, drug use, and then the pleasure that women feel. Then next, when we talk about actually the same thing, I need to explain another article that is very important, and they're talking about, the article title is validation of Persian version of desire for drug questionnaire and obsessive compulsive drug use scale in heroin dependent. So this article is talking about actually the compulsive obsessive or obsessive compulsive disorder in heroin dependent on Persian population. I think they are talking about, and then they are talking when we see this article, I'm again going very briefly. This actually have done on especially Persian language speaking abusers, especially that use the heroin, because our topic is about opiates, and they are looking at two things. One is the desire for drug, which we commonly called as drug craving. Why drug craving? Like just some people have food craving, some people like food, some certain foods, and they need more, like for example slice of the cake or sometimes some ice cream flavor. Same like the drug craving also is one of the thing, and they're looking on the Persian population that taking heroin. Persia is Iran is one of the example from them. So they are looking for desire for drug questionnaire in term context of the drug craving, and they are also looking on the obsessive compulsive drug scale that person will face this compulsive disorder. And the conclusion they are talking about that they could be valid, that they are investigating the instrument. What is meant by instrument mean the questionnaire that validate them. And let me see, this is the questionnaire they have written in their language, in Persian language and in their English language. In simple words, I know that you are not familiar with the research, so I'm not going to go for detail, but in simple terms, that they develop the questionnaire for desire for drug and obsessive compulsive drugs, and then they found that the questions that they design for drug craving and obsessive compulsive disorder are very correlated, and they found that the person that have taking heroin, they are heroin dependent, they may become obsessive compulsive disorder because of the excessive use and then because of the habit that may develop. And then they also mentioned that the drug craving will also increase. So we're discussing about the euphoria and the excitement and pleasure and feeling of well-being and happiness. Then the repeated use of this drug can have a decreased effect. I already discussed that it could develop the tolerance. This is the table 13.2. They're talking about the sequence appear if somebody do not take heroin or morphine. Heroin and morphine is another type of drug. Then we have another drug which is known as methadone, which is an alternative to heroin and morphine, but they has been given to patient that having withdrawal symptoms. We already discussed before in previous lectures what are withdrawal symptoms. And actually, if a person taking heroin, that the symptoms are sign, we mentioned abstinence syndrome, mean patient don't take drug and already taken done drug before. Craving for drug, I already mentioned drug craving, anxiety, yawning, perspiration, running nose, teary eyes. Timing we mentioned on the right side from 6 to 14 hours. What happened? Then you see that on the right side in the heroin and morphine with the time. So initially start with craving after previous dose, approximately hours after previous dose, 6 hours. Then the sign increases in 14 hours, having yawning, perspiration. Then 16 hours it become more problem like pupil dilation, goosebumps, tremor, hot, cold flashes, aching bone and muscles, loss of appetite. Then again going time with time, you see time increasing 24 to 36 hours, then 36 to 40 hours. So increase of the time increases, the characteristics or sign become more and more severe, and that is actually abstinence syndrome. So these are all some medical terms I mentioned: yawning, perspiration, increasing of the pupil signs, goosebumps, then increase of the intensity plus insomnia above. So these are raise of the blood pressure, raise of the temperature, respiratory rate increases, and then restlessness. These are become more severe. And in the last stage, after last dose taken, the difference between them around 36 to 48 hours, vomiting, diarrhea is more severe, and that vomiting and diarrhea is responsible then and increase of the blood sugar, then patient need the drug again. So that's show you the severity of the drug, that how much severe that drug is. And what the physicians do if a person is drug addicted like morphine and heroin, they give the alternative like methadone. Methadone is less severe, as compared to the heroin and morphine, and then it is used for reducing that withdrawal symptoms or reversal of the patient to normal circumstances. So you can see that 24 to 34 and 48 to 72 hours, the signs are only these three. So it means methadone is given as a replacement for the patient that are addicted to heroin or morphine. So that is very important thing. And in the next slide I giving you these pictures like craving, anxiety, this picture for craving, anxiety, yawning, perspiration, pupil dilation, then shakiness, hot flash, then person feel like insomnia, pulse rate, depression, high blood glucose level. So I put these pictures to explain it to you. And this is one picture of other craving. Everybody have their craving. Some people like shoes, chocolate. She is doing yoga, because in yoga we need not to think anything, but in yoga people that are craving with something have feeling like chocolates, shoes. So this is a craving, another kind of craving that a person having. When we talk about the physical dependence, as if you see the symptoms before, I already discussed diarrhea. In severe cases, when the difference between 36 to 46 hours or 48 hours, a patient did not take any dose from the previous dose, then pain, miseries, that will be happen. That's why methadone will be given, that used to which is less severe, having less withdrawal symptoms, and patient feel better. So that is the thing that we have the psychological dependence, and we discuss in our I already show you one of the research article from the Persian population that are addicted to heroin, and they check that patient having obsessive compulsive disorder experiencing. But when we talk about psychological dependence, we need to understand that there are two type of reinforcement. One is positive reinforcement, the second one is negative reinforcement. To understand this concept, let me share you one video that is very interesting topic, and I will share you that video with you.
Bypass Publishing presents Psychology in the Fast Lane. Difficult topics explained. Negative reinforcement versus punishment. Many people confuse the terms negative reinforcement and punishment, thinking they mean the same thing, but they don't. Remember, reinforcers in general strengthen voluntary responses, and punishers weaken voluntary responses. So, growing up while I was in school, my mom could have punished me whenever I received bad grades in order to weaken whatever behavior was causing me to get bad grades. Or she could have reinforced my good behavior with something desirable whenever I did study or get good grades. Now, there are two types of each approach, positive and negative. Positive reinforcement is a process that strengthens the likelihood of a particular response by adding a stimulus after the behavior is performed. Negative reinforcement also strengthens the likelihood of a particular response, but by removing an undesirable consequence. So my mom could have told me that if I got good grades during the school year, then I wouldn't have to get a summer job, and that would be my reinforcer. Note that in both cases, the response of getting good grades is strengthened. We can punish a response by also adding or removing a stimulus. Like, I could punish the bad behavior of a child by spanking its backside. Or I could punish you after you speed by taking away your driver's license. Both of these things would act to suppress certain bad behaviors. So punishment is either adding or removing something that would stop a response from happening again. And reinforcement is adding or removing something that would encourage the response to happen again.
The toxic potentials for abusing heroin or opium is very dangerous, because there are two toxic potential. One is acute and second is chronic. What is the difference between acute and chronic? Acute illness is last for a few days, for example cold or flu, whereas chronic illness could be example like diabetes, arthritis and heart disease. So if a patient having a short-term disease for a short time like 1 week or 2 weeks, it is considered as chronic, whereas if a patient having long-term disease like diabetes is lifetime disease, hypertension is lifetime disease, heart diseases, cardiovascular diseases are lifetime disease, arthritis is also chronic disease, inflammation of the joints. So they, if it occurs years 1 or 2 or more than years, then it is known as chronic disease. So opioids having very severe chronic effect on the body. So the one of the specific effect of opioid is to depress the respiratory center. So opioid also have the acute toxicities, like it depress the respiration and respiration becomes shallow. The overdose of the opioids can lead to depress the respiration and pinpoint pupil. What is meant by pinpoint pupil? That's example of the pupil. If you compare on the left side and the right side, the pupil, it is different. Let me clear with you this dot and compare that dot. So compare this and compare that pupil. So that is a difference between pinpoint pupil. Pinpoint is just like a point like a small point like pupil. So the pupil shrink when a person take the drugs, whereas if a person normal circumstances, the pupil is dilated, is long. So that's one of the sign of the pinpoint pupil. Pin like, point like pupil. So acute toxicity also, a person take these heroin or morphine, they feel dream filled sleep, as we discussed in our previous point as well, that patient having feel like piped dreamers, they become pipe dreamers and they take these drugs and they dream, and it's just like a daydreaming with these drugs. Let me share with you another article that I found, and regarding China. Today I found some of the important information regarding China, and I found that they are very good for educational perspective. Okay, this is actually the non-medical use of cough syrup among secondary vocational school students, and this article is a national survey in China, and the article published in good journal in medicine, and this is an observational study. And they found that the cough syrup, I already discussed the cough syrup in previous lecture, that it has been abused not only in Nigeria now, but I found that it is cough abusing in China in vocational school students. So they did a survey on the China population on the non-medical use of the cough syrup, and they found on secondary vocational students. So if you read this article, you found that, so they found a prevalence, lifetime prevalence of these non-use of the cough syrups is 3.47%, and then they found that people that are daily smoking, they are highly prevalent in that population. High level of impulsiveness, part-time job experience also, that people that are doing part-time jobs, they are also having this risk of taking cough syrups. And then they compare the prevalence of, that's the point that is very important, that the prevalence of this study was lower among the junior and high school students in the United States, at which the rate currently cough syrup is used is 9.5%. So they compare that, when we compare the prevalence of the non-use of cough syrups in this population compared with the United States high school or junior school, it's still low. So it means in America it is still on a high as compared to China. In the prevalence of the non-use of the cough syrup is still low. That is very interesting fact when we compare with the difference between America and China population among the high school grades and among the vocational users. And the second thing that is found very interesting, that the Chinese authority have been regulating the psychoactive substance very strictly, and that I like it really, because I also believe that we need to strictly monitor them, because the availability of these all ingredients or all drugs openly may leads to people misuse them more, because people always go for intense pleasure and excitement, and then we need to have some control measures, especially talking about the Chinese authority. They are controlling them rigorously, which is, I think that it is good, because we need to maintain this perspective. So you can read this article in detail. They have a lot of detailed information. You can read them. When we talk about chronic toxicity, it could be responsible to spread blood-borne disease. Now this is a question that why blood-borne disease would be spread with the use of cough syrups or with the use of opioids. It is not with the cough syrup, actually it's with the opioids like morphine and heroin. Obviously for getting intense pleasure, the patient take them with using injections, and that injection can be given intravenously. If excessive use of injection will occur, and usually that pleasure people take from groups. They have certain groups that are addicting or that are depending on that drugs, and if someone have the AIDS or HIV or hepatitis, it could be spread from the other people to the people through injections that has been used to take the heroin and morphine to get the intense pleasure. So that's one of the reasons that when we talk about chronic toxicity like HIV, AIDS, hepatitis, that spread through injections that has been misused with the heroin. The second thing that is important is about the mentally weak and physically weak. Yes, obviously I already mentioned that the obsessive compulsive disorders or the behavior disorders, for seeking intense pleasure, sometimes some people do some acts, and obviously that act obviously affecting their brain, and that brain actually obviously if you're doing certain acts like to get sexual pleasure, it may affect your brain mentally and you become mentally weak, and your brain provoke them to do them again and again. So that's one of the thing that I believe also, that people, not only we have people taking these drugs not only have high risk of getting blood-borne disease like HIV or hepatitis, but also having high risk of mentally weak and physically weak people, because people taking heroin and morphine become malnutrition as well. They don't have getting desire to eat the food. So that's very important. I have another interesting article that I need to show, but I will explain with you in our next lecture, as the video already getting very lengthy. So thank you so much for today's lecture. Hope to see you again.